Hey guys, this is Dave Swillem from the Waking Up From Work podcast and Crawl Space Audio. Today I am doing another Wake Up Wednesday, which is something I do weekly. I put up onto Instagram, but this is actually going to be on YouTube too. And I put out content on recording, on podcasting, on business, on going after your passion as a full-time gig. And I go through my own journey kind of like on the side through the podcast and everything. But for those of you that don't know, that's what this is about. Today I wanted to talk to some indie artists about recording at home. So as an audio engineer with Crawl Space Audio, I'm always working with indie artists on their records. And a trend that I've seen with technology and with barrier to entry is more artists are recording at home than they ever did before. And that's really, really cool because it stimulates art and it exposes art that never could have come out, and it lets it get to the mainstream, which it was never able to before, either because it costs too much to record a record or because people were able to block you from putting your music out, so you couldn't get it and distribute it to other people enough so that you could really share that music. Now you can pay $20 and go to DistroKid and put your music up so that everyone in the entire world can hear it within like a week, which is insane. And you can go to Guitar Center and pay $100 for an interface, $100 for an okay condenser mic, and as long as you're following really tight practice for how you record, you honestly can then take that, put it through stock plugins on a digital audio workstation, or some are free, and then take that and distribute it across the world. It's amazing that that can happen. And so bottom line is more people are recording at home before, and it's my job as an audio engineer to help you with that, to make it so that we can work together to create awesome art. And the way that that happens is being on point with the way that you record at home, because you can record at home. You just have to do the right things with the tools that you have to make sure that it's the right quality. I'm going to go through a couple tips that I've seen from people bringing audio to me to then complete the project, that I've given to them as feedback for what could be better next time for that vocal take, or their drums that they brought in, or whatever it is that they recorded at home and then brought in, and then we add things and we mix and we bring all these other elements to it to finish their record. There's some opportunity in certain things that they do when they record at home that they just don't know, and then they bring it to me and I can always work with it. But if they brought it to me and they followed some of these tips, then it would be on point. We could make the same type of record that anyone else does on any of the charts. First tip is going to be timing. Timing is probably the most important and probably the easiest way to see an amateur record versus a professional record. Is a lot of artists that I work with in the studio, they've never tracked with a click track, with a metronome. They've never actually recorded with it. They probably don't know what BPM or beat per minute their songs are based off of, or the time signatures that their songs are based off of, because they're writing from feel, or it just hasn't been a reason to do it at this point. Maybe you are super capable of doing it, but until you record, you just kind of know where it's supposed to be at, but you haven't actually sat down to say, what is this actually supposed to be at, so we do this consistently? And how should this song feel? So what tempo should it be to make it so that it's always that feel? So having the right timing is consistency, and that's why it matters, because people hear professional as consistency. And so there's some forms of music where you don't have to worry about it too much, in the sense that like some jazz things or some jammy things, or even when I'm doing my records where we've charted out tempo or anything like that, sometimes it feels good to flow in tempo like that. So I'm not saying to kill that creative. What I'm saying is, when you are going to record at home, number one thing you should probably start with is take your song and play it. There's apps out there that you can get a metronome, or you can get an old school metronome and you can actually tap to tempo, and you can tap that and get that click, get what tempo it is for your song, and then practice with that. And then when you record, super important to actually set it in there with yourself when you record for what tempo that needs to be when you record your song. So if you can't figure out time signatures or things like that, the bare minimum thing you got to do is at least create a click track at the right timing and have that grid out in your project so that that way you stay on time, or at least close enough that when you were to take that project and give it to a mixing engineer, they can then take that and look at that grid system and look where you want to be at, and then I can at least do things to edit to get it to where it needs to be at. But what happens sometimes is people record it and they record the whole song, and the bass line for a DAW is they're going to start at probably 120 BPM just by nature and just put that in there, and a lot of artists ignore it or they don't record with the click at all, and that's just there. And then it's up to us to try to figure out what are you aiming for. And a lot of times, because you're not recording with a click, you're going to flow up and down quite a bit, and it makes it pretty much a nightmare. So if you record with a click track, that makes it so that everything else can fall in line, and all the people involved with the project will all think of click track as God. Everything goes back to click. When we have a question or confused on something, click. Okay. So that's timing, that's important. Next thing, I don't want to spend a crazy amount of time on, but it's going to be tuning, or it's just going to be what it is that you're tracking with. You don't need to have the $1 million guitar if you're recording with it, but it's nice that you put some fresh strings on it. It's nice that you put that in tune frequently between every song that you track, or frequently enough that you're sure that that is in tune. Or maybe you're a vocalist and you sing, and that is something that even if you're doing like an alternative style of music where it's okay that it's not on point, or you're going to run it through auto-tune anyway, it's really important to maybe get a little bit of a warm-up in, so that that way you're not completely off. Or if you know chords and everything like that, it is super killer if you can find those chords out and be able to put those on piano and be able to locate those notes and try to keep yourself in tune. But you just don't want to take a guitar that you haven't tuned in a long time, then go track it and then bring it to me, and then there's not too much that I can do. I can tune it still, but it's not as perfect. And you make it so you might not be able to use that take. Even with vocals, when you auto-tune them, there are certain swoops and things like that. If it's not like meant to have that heavy auto-tune effect, it can prompt that, and sometimes I can't control it. So you want to pay attention to tuning on instruments. Once again, if you can find out that key beforehand, or you can figure out what chords, at least, even if you don't know the key and you know what chord that falls into, or find that note on the piano, all of that can be really helpful for writing later on. It's going to be helpful for the engineer to do auto-tuning. It's going to be helpful to make it so that that track is in line with other instruments that are 100% in tune, so that they don't sound out of tune, in respect to you. The third thing is going to be your space. So listen, you're recording at home, so you're not recording in a commercial facility. That's cool, because you can still get amazing takes there. What's important about that is, where are you tracking in that space? It has to make sense. So you can record in your house, but you don't want to record in a corner. Now all of a sudden the bass starts really swelling up on it. Or you don't want to record where there's outside noises. You have cars and things, or you have, dogs and cats, or like other people in the house in that area where it's just bleeding through the wall. And you don't want to record, a lot of people make makeshift vocal booths and things like that, and that's great, but don't just put the foam up. Listen to what it sounds like. People put the foam up and then they just assume that it's good. If I do this closet full of foam, then it's good. But I've seen people use closets full of foam that sound like absolute garbage. And those same people, if they just went into the middle of their room and then maybe got one of those foam inserts that go around your head to try to grab some of that and make it a little bit drier, or just honestly, the room doesn't sound that bad in the center and you're close micing it, it might sound worse essentially in where you think that you're treating it. So don't focus so much on what you're using for sound absorption. I have these acoustic panels in here. These help out a little bit for reverb, but they're not incredible. Don't focus so much on what do I buy for sound treatments, more so finding that spot in your room, and record vocals or guitar, whatever it is, record it several times in different places and find out where is it in that room that is going to sound right, essentially, for you. Fourth tip I have is going to be setting the right level. Why that is important is because of a couple things. If you have it too high and then you haven't checked your level enough, you can distort it. And digital distortion sounds terrible, whereas like a lot of analog distortion is that warm feel that a lot of people like. Digital distortion is awful. It almost never sounds artistic. It almost always sounds bad. I've never once induced digital distortion artistically in my entire career, and I've done a lot of hardcore and punk and everything. I love distortion, and that's just not a flavor that sounds good. So what you want to do is, when you're getting your level, you want to do the loudest thing that you would possibly do in that song, and then set that so that you're at a good place and you're not going to distort with that. You can always make your audio louder. You just can't unclip that, essentially. You can, but it's with insanely expensive, complex software, and it never does completely perfect as not doing it in the first place. So you can always get louder. You really can't fix when you've gone over that line, and if that happens in like the absolute perfect take, or it happens and you don't notice and then you pass that stuff on to your mix engineer, that's when you really can't use the take the way that you thought you could when you're recording at home. So setting the level to the loudest thing that's going to happen so that it still looks healthy, but it's never going to pass that point. But also, you don't want to go too quiet where, depending on what preamp that you're using or the volume that you have on it, it's actually not using the full taste of the microphone that you have, or it's not getting in that full signal, where it could also affect that negatively as well. So you want to get that sweet spot where you're just not too loud that you're going to clip it. And mic choice can help a lot with what you're doing for the things that are affecting you in the house. So if you're using a condenser, you're going to pick up more things. So if you have the gain higher on that, you're going to pick up other things in the house potentially. So I use an SM7B quite a bit when I do any vocals at home, because it is a dynamic mic, but it sounds really nice compared to other dynamic mics, but it doesn't capture things as far out when I push it. It still wants to be right here, because it is a dynamic mic. So mic choice can also help with the level that you're recording at, depending on what you're recording. And then of course, if you're recording something direct in, then it doesn't matter what you're doing. You literally have the TV on, or you can be, doesn't matter what's happening, because it's not touching anything in the environment. So last thing on there is, if you're recording at home, just make sure that you have the ability to get everything out as an individual file that's unaffected, because I see a lot of times people record and they'll record all the drums together as one thing, or they'll record all the guitar into one thing. And while you can still get these really cool takes and you can still treat those as a mixing engineer later on, it makes it really difficult to have choices. If all the drums are in one thing, I really want to do something different with kick, snare, and hi-hats, and I want to do things spatially, I want to do things dynamically, and EQ and everything. I want to treat all those things different. If I have to have those all as one little stem, I can't do everything that I want to do with it, or if I do, it's going to take a lot longer, because I'm going to have to do things like automate reverbs and all sorts of crazy stuff to be able to get stuff where I want it on that. So make it so that when you record things, that you record them in separate takes, so that way they can be treated separate. Other than that, just make sure that you keep recording at home, because you 100% can make an amazing record from home.